Welcome to the channel, everyone. In today's video, we are going to give a comprehensive review of the Kowa TSN-66A spotting scope, specifically for birding. First, I want to give a shout out to Kowa. Kowa was kind enough to send me this spotting scope for review as a loaner for the next 4 months so that I can give you a thorough long-term review of the spotting scope. In this video, I'm going to give you my initial thoughts after just a few times of using the spotting scope. We're then going to compare this spotting scope to other popular spotting scopes in the birding industry. I'm also going to give you all the pros and cons that I find of this particular model. And then at the end, I'll give you my long-term review, how I'm feeling about the spotting scope after using it extensively for the next 4 months. So let's dive in. I've had a chance to use this spotting scope a few times now, and so it is time for my initial thoughts. The first thing I'll say is that when I took this spotting scope out of the box, I was a little skeptical that this was going to be able to handle all of the conditions that I need it to perform in. And the reason that I thought that is just because of how small and lightweight this scope really is. I was like, can this really perform at an upper level? I mean, this is an upper level scope. When it comes to spotting scopes, I've always kind of been of the mindset that bigger is better. And so when I first used this, that mindset has started to change now. This spotting scope can absolutely handle all of the conditions that I've at least thrown at it right now. I've been super, super impressed with the image that this scope provides. And so there's kind of two pieces to that image. There's sharpness and there's contrast. These upper level scopes use some of the highest quality glass they can. And so Kowa is using fluorite crystal glass. That glass is supposed to completely eliminate chromatic aberrations and make for a very, very sharp image. So when I first looked through the scope, one of the very first things I looked for was sharpness across the entire field of view. And I looked for this in several different conditions, and every single time I was able to get the image perfectly in focus, extremely sharp, and it is extremely sharp from edge to edge. So in that sense, it passed the first test, right? Some of those lower tier scopes that don't use as high quality of glass might be sharp in the middle, but then that sharpness starts to fall off pretty quickly. And you just don't get as good of a view in those kind of scopes as you do in something like this Kowa. So that was really nice to see. The second part of that though is the contrast. And if you don't have a punchy, contrasty image, you're not going to get as good of a view. And so luckily this scope provides a very, very nice, perfect amount of contrast, not over contrasty. Overall, between the sharpness and the contrast, this is producing one of the best views that I've seen in a spotting scope. So far, one of my favorite features actually of this scope, other than the sharpness and the contrast and the image quality, is the ergonomics of the scope. And I actually wasn't even planning on talking about this. I wasn't even thinking of mentioning it. But time and time again, I find myself, when I'm using the scope, just thinking, wow, this is really, really nice to use. And so what I mean by that is this eyepiece is the 25 to 60 eyepiece. And when I zoom, there's the perfect amount of tension. It's not too loose and it's not too tight, where I can dial in the exact amount of zoom that I want, and I know it's going to stay locked on there unless I move it. And the same goes for the focusing mechanism. So Kowa uses a coarse focusing wheel and a fine focusing wheel. And I actually don't ever even use the coarse focusing wheel. I would be fine if Kowa just got rid of that because of how good this fine focusing wheel is. And there's, again, the perfect amount of tension on this focus wheel where I can dial in the exact amount of focus that I need to make the sharpest image possible. And again, it's going to stay there. It's locked on. It's so smooth. There's the perfect amount of tension. I just absolutely love using this. Now I should mention a couple caveats. One of the caveats being I've only used this a couple times and I've only used it in really, really nice lighting. And so I'm anxious to start using the spotting scope in some more challenging conditions to see if it can hold up in those conditions. So one of the things I really want to key in on when I'm testing this under these more challenging conditions is the image brightness. So this being a 66 millimeter scope does not let in as much light as some of those 88 and 99 millimeter scopes. And one of the things I'm noticing is that when I zoom from 25 to 60, even in ideal lighting, I'm still losing some of that image brightness. And that'll be true for any scope. That's not unique to this spotting scope, but some of those larger diameter scopes handle it a little better just because they let in more light. And so it's not a problem right now when the lighting is perfect outside, but I am curious how that's going to hold up when it starts to get darker to see if that's going to be a problem or not. One of the more popular birding scopes in the hobby is the Vortex Razor HD spotting scope. A lot of birders use Vortex because of the price to quality point, but also because they have a really good return policy, good customer service. And so today we're going to compare the Kowa, which is a more expensive, higher tier spotting scope, with this Razor HD that really does get really good reviews from birders. So this isn't an apples to apples comparison. The Razor is the 85 millimeter, so this has a larger diameter. It should let in more light. The Kowa is the 66 millimeter, so it's not a direct comparison. Really, it would be more fair to compare the Kowa 88 with this 85 millimeter scope, but this is what we have to work with today. I was hoping to test this in a little more challenging conditions. This is one of those rare sunny days in Michigan in the winter that we get. It's actually really mild. And so I actually don't expect a whole lot of differences in overall brightness just because of how much light there really is. But my dad and I are both gonna look through these spotting scopes and see what kind of differences we can come up with in conditions like this. So after looking at both the Razor HD and the Kowa, what are your thoughts?
First thought is the Kowa is much sharper, noticeably sharper than the Razor HD. The brightness and everything looks the same. Color looks the same, but for overall sharpness, the Kowa is much better.
So one thing I've learned from this is it's really hard to compare differences in spotting scopes when the conditions are really good for viewing like this. And so I'm not seeing a ton of differences, honestly, between the Razor HD here and the Kowa. I do think the Kowa is a little sharper. I don't really see a difference in light, which is surprising to me. I expected the Razor to appear much brighter because it is that 85 millimeter. But I think it's just because of how sunny and light it is. It's really hard to see differences in lighting when it's like this. So it would be better to compare these under some more challenging conditions. I do think the Razor might have a little more contrast, and that's probably because of the 85 millimeter under these conditions. But really, when it's nice and sunny and bright like this, both of these scopes are going to perform really well. They both appear really sharp across the entire frame, including the Razor from edge to edge. I don't really see any sharpness issues. I just feel like the Kowa has a little more sharpness. It's easier to dial in that sharpness. The one thing I noticed between these two scopes though is this Razor goes from 20 to 60 on the zoom eyepiece, and this Kowa goes from 25 to 60, and it's the wide angle. And so the Razor at 20, at least to me, looks like it has the same field of view as the Kowa at 25. So you get more zoom on the Kowa, but you get about the same field of view, which is nice. It's nice to have that wider field of view. The wide angle eyepiece is really standing out in this test, at least right here. So it's nicer to be able to have more zoom, but a wider field of view. So it's now December. I've had this scope for about 4 months, and I've been able to test it in every condition possible, from really nice weather from my initial review to now some really challenging weather, cloudy, really windy. I've had this thing looking at birds at 40-mile-an-hour gusts. I've had it in rain, sleet, snowstorms. And I've really been able to test it in some of the most extreme conditions that you would want to test a spotting scope in. And really, my general impressions from when I first tested it out after those first couple times using the scope to now, after 4 months of long-term use, really hasn't changed. This scope continues to impress me every single time I take it out. One of the things I have noticed though, and I really wanted to test from that initial review to now, is under these darker, more challenging conditions, I do sometimes find myself wanting a larger diameter scope, something that lets in a little more light. I do a lot of my birding with a scope in less than ideal conditions. I do a lot of lake watching in really, really challenging, windy, cloudy, stormy conditions. Those are often what's best for the birds. And occasionally I do find myself wishing I had a little more light coming into this scope. There's a reason that Kowa makes those larger diameter scopes. And so conditions like this, where it's cloudy, windy, dark, are those kind of conditions where you might consider having a larger scope. It all depends on how you're planning on using this scope in your birding adventures. I continue to be impressed with how sharp this scope is across the entire field of view. That's something that's really important to me, and it really creates a very pleasant view. The contrast in the scope is great. It's nice and small, it's light, it's easy to pack. And so this scope, if this was my only scope that I was using, I would be perfectly content with this scope in pretty much any conditions possible for birding. You know, right now I'm watching all of these gulls feeding out over the lake. I'm watching distant ducks, duck flocks that are coming in, and I'm having no trouble, even in these really dark conditions, seeing all of these field marks to help me identify these somewhat distant gulls and ducks that I really need to see to be able to make those identifications. So it is absolutely freezing out here. We're gonna head back to my office. I'm gonna give you my final thoughts on who should buy the Kowa TSN-66A and who might benefit from one of their larger diameter spotting scopes, and we'll wrap it up there.
So by now you can probably tell that I'm a big fan of this spotting scope. So it might surprise you to hear that I'm actually not going to recommend this spotting scope for everyone. So if you're just a casual birder who uses a scope just a couple times a year, then you might not even need one of these higher end Kowa scopes. You could probably get away with one of those Razor HDs like we reviewed earlier in this video, and for the bang for the buck, that's a really, really good scope. If you're only going to use it a couple times throughout the year in really good conditions, that might be your best route to go. If you're a little more heavy user of a spotting scope, you're still kind of a casual birder, and you're not using these spotting scopes in more challenging conditions, then the Kowa TSN-66A is going to serve your purposes really, really well. You're still going to get that high quality fluorite crystal glass, and you probably don't have any use really for those much larger, much more expensive spotting scopes like the 88 or the 99. If you travel a lot with a spotting scope, then the size and the weight of the spotting scope really should enter the equation when you're thinking about packing your bag, how much space a spotting scope is going to take up, how heavy that spotting scope is. That's where these TSN 66As are really, really going to shine, because they won't take up as much space as one of those much larger scopes, but you're still getting that crystal clear, high quality glass, and you're going to be able to use this in basically any scenario that you can throw at it. So as a traveling spotting scope, this is really, really good. It's also really good if you are on the move in the field a lot. So if you're carrying a spotting scope long distances, frequently setting them up and taking them down, then this is going to be a lot easier to carry. It's going to be a lot lighter, and you're going to not feel it as much as if you're lugging around one of those really big 88 or 99 millimeter spotting scopes. However, if you are a heavy user of spotting scopes and you are out in the field using spotting scopes all the time in great conditions, but also really, really challenging conditions, I do think you're going to want to skip the TSN-66A and start looking at something with a larger diameter glass like the 88 or the 99. I did have a chance to very briefly look through a Kowa TSN-88 directly next to the 66 in some really challenging conditions, and it was very obvious that the 88 millimeter in those challenging conditions was letting in a lot more light than the 66. It led to a brighter image, and it led to a more contrasty image, which overall created a much more pleasing view in those conditions. And so if you're going to be using this throughout the year all the time in challenging conditions, I'm going to suggest you probably look at the Kowa TSN 88 or the 99 model. So to be fair, I haven't had a chance to really use the 88 in the long term to look at the pros and cons over the course of a field season. And I haven't ever used the 99, but there really is no doubt that in those more challenging conditions, a larger spotting scope with the highest quality glass you can get, like the Kowa with the fluorite crystal glass, is really going to outperform a 66 model like this. So I'm curious, did this video help you decide on a spotting scope? I would love to hear your feedback on other spotting scopes for birding. If you liked this video, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel, and I will catch you in the next one. Good birding!